Hello, I'm Mary Sue Glosser, Creative Director for Lectures and Performance Programs at the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome. We have a season here at the Art Institute called 360 Degrees Art Beyond Borders. It's a season that studies globalization in our time, and it is a series of programs in which the Art Institute of Chicago joins with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Poetry Foundation, and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs to study our past, our present, and to anticipate transitions in our traditions as we go into the future. There are a series of lectures, and it is my privilege to be sitting here with Natalie Zemon Davis, Professor Emeritus at Princeton University, who is going to present tonight a lecture about one of her wonderful historic characters. May I introduce Natalie Zemon Davis. Hi, Natalie.
Hello, Mary Sue Glosser.
Good to see you. Tell us about your character first, the character that we see in your book that you will discuss tonight.
Leo Africanus' real name was Al-Hazan Ibn Muhammad Ibn Ahmed Al-Wazan. He was born in Granada about the time that that land was seized from the Muslims by the Catholic monarchs of Spain, brought up in Morocco, grew up to become a diplomat for the Sultan of Fez, traveled all over Africa, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, crossed the Mediterranean to Istanbul, and then on the way back from Cairo to his Sultan of Fez, he was kidnapped by Christian pirates. We're now in the year of 1518.
Kidnapped by pirates.
Kidnapped by Christian pirates. They knew they had an interesting man on his hands when they discovered he was a diplomat, not just a common merchant. Took him to Rome, where Leo X, of course the great Renaissance Pope, was very eager to have him. He was in the middle, Leo X, of calling for a crusade against the Turks. So after imprisoning this diplomat for a time, the diplomat decided to convert to Christianity, spent the next 7 years of his life, until 1527, in Italy, teaching Arabic to important churchmen, who of course wanted to learn it because they wanted also to preach a crusade to convert the Turks.
He's living in the Vatican doing this?
He was living, no, not in the Vatican. He was living in Rome. He was able to see, with the memories of the great mosques, which he thought were very beautiful, of North Africa behind him, and the beautiful fountains and mosaics and so forth. He was now able to see some of the interesting building going on in Rome in the 1520s, and to see at the church at which he worshipped Raphael's new painting of the prophet Isaiah. This is in Sant Agostino. And teach Arabic to important churchmen, and then become, after a few years of really mastering Italian somewhat, he still was a foreigner's Italian, but he could write it, beginning to write books in Latin or in Italian for Europeans, describing the world that he had left behind him. His most famous book is called, in its later versions, The Description of Africa. And it appeared, it was published in Italian, in English, in Latin, and in French, although he himself had only left it in a manuscript in Italian. Then he went back home. And we have only a little bit of a sight of him afterward. But he seemed to me such a marvelous example of someone who was trying to cross cultural boundaries, put together worlds, tangle together, braid together features of European thought and North African thought, think about equivalencies between Christianity and Islam, as well as tensions between them, in a world shot through with violence. That's what strikes me about him, this possibility of communication and crossing, even though on both sides there were crusades being called by the Christians against the Turks, and similarly in Istanbul, the sultans were being claimed as world conquerors who were to fight against the Christians, which they were.
I want to mention your book because you speak of Leo Africanus translating his manuscripts translated, or him translating, and your Trickster's Travels, which is your book, your book about this wonderful character. This itself has been translated.
Yes.
This book is now in Italian. You write in English, but it's already
in French and just came out in German, Italian. The Spanish translation will be out soon, and Turkish is on its way, and Chinese and Korean.
Natalie, you are a Leon Africanus of sorts. I should mention too, as I'm going to ask you how you found your character, but I also wanted to mention for our listeners that you are the great historian who found the character of Martin Guerre.
Yes.
And the character, tell us about Martin Guerre. I know that I saw it first as a film with Gérard Depardieu.
Yeah, and I had lots of fun working on the film.
Yes.
Martin Guerre was a peasant who lived in the Pyrenees, and he was born about in the 1520s, lived in the Pyrenees, married very, very young, a beautiful young villager named Bertrand de Ros, and then abandoned her, leaving her behind with one child, and disappeared for 9 years, and then seemed to come back. And was received by Bertrand into her bed and received by the whole family. Bertrand had a child or two by this new Martin Guerre. And after 4 years, he was accused of being an imposter. And it was a famous case. It was a cause célèbre in 16th century France. Everybody came to watch the final verdict. The court was about to declare the man claiming to be Martin Guerre and accused to be an imposter the real Martin Guerre, when the real Martin Guerre showed up in the court. It was a marvelous story to tell, and he was finally identified by Bertrand.
But Natalie, how do you find these characters? How did you find Leo Africanus?
In the case of Martin Guerre, I found it because the judge who wrote the case,
yes,
who judged the case, wrote a book about it, which became a 16th century bestseller. Now, I found Leo Africanus, and let me explain that we call him Leo Africanus because his baptismal name was after Leo X.
Will you tell us again his fuller name?
His full name was Al-Hazan ibn Muhammad, son of Muhammad, ibn Ahmed, grandson of Ahmed, Al-Wazan, which is a word meaning the weigher, the family may have been weighers, Al-Granati, that is the man from Granada, Al-Fezi, the man from Fez.
That's beautiful. And again, the full thing is...
That's the whole name. But then when he was baptized, he was given the name of Giovanni Leone after the Pope, Giovanni de' Medici, Pope Leo X. And then he became known in Europe as Leo Africanus, Leo the African. In my book, I try to call him repeatedly by his African names, his Arabic names, or when I refer to him in his Christian name, I often call him not Giovanni Leone, but Johanna al-Assad, which is the Arabic for Giovanni Leone. And it's like Johann the Lion, because I'm trying to recreate him as a North African, as a Muslim, as an Arab. Now, here again, I first came across him from the book, not in the original manuscript that he left in his Foreigner's Italian, but in the really quite handsome folio edition translated into French, published in 1556, many years after he'd gone back to North Africa. I was young then. I was a graduate student, still working on my doctoral dissertation on Protestantism and the printing workers of Lyon, and one of those printers had translated and published that book.
Thank you so much for coming to the Art Institute of Chicago. We look forward to your lecture, and your lecture about Trickster Travels will actually go from the podium tonight into our podcast library at the Art Institute of Chicago. So check it out, and please join us for other events during our 360 Degrees Art Beyond Borders Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Mary Sue.